and welcome to the ICONS New Scholarship Podcast. I'm Marcela Prieto, and I'm Associate Professor of Law and Philosophy at the University of Southern California Gould School of Law and co-editor-in-chief of the Spanish issue of ICON. Today, I'll be chatting with Gila Stobler about her book, Women's Rights in Liberal States, Patriarchy, Liberalism, Religion, and the Chimera of Rights, just published by Cambridge University Press. Gila is full professor of law and former dean of law school at the College of Law and Business Israel. She also serves as the editor-in-chief of Law and Ethics of Human Rights. Welcome, Gila. We're so glad to have you today with us to chat about your book.
Thank you, Marcela. I'm really happy to be here, and I really appreciate that you've invited me to discuss my book.
It really is my own pleasure. It's really such a wonderfully rich book. It was a pleasure to read it. So I thought we could get started by placing this book within the general context of your work. You've done a lot of work on the patriarchy, on religious freedom, on the liberal state. So when and why did you start thinking about this book in particular? What made you want to write it?
Okay, so as you say, I've been working on the conflict between women's rights and patriarchal religion in liberal states for, I think, over 20 years. And when I started, the focus of all the writings and research at that time was on this conflict only in the context of multiculturalism. So when I started my JSD at NYU School of Law, it was shortly after Susan Okin, whose work, by the way, I really admire and I discuss a lot in the book, has just published her essay, Is Multiculturalism Bad for Women, with all the responses. And the debates that this book generated practically consumed the field. So it was everything that everybody talked about. Nobody was interested in religion except as it pertains to multiculturalism. And even at that time, I thought that although the debate regarding multiculturalism is, of course, important, the problem is much, much wider than that. So that debate was premised on the assumption that the general relationship between patriarchal religion and the state in liberal states is satisfactory, that it protects women, that the only question is whether if we put multiculturalism in this mix, would that be a problem or not? And my claim in my own work all along, starting with my JSD, was that this assumption is fundamentally wrong. But for many years, it was very hard to convince people that I was right. And it's only in recent years, once the democratic backsliding started in many liberal states, people started realizing that patriarchal religion is taking a major role in the democratic backsliding, in the rise of populism. And that's when people started becoming more receptive to these kinds of arguments. And I also obviously felt that these kinds of arguments became much more urgent, and that I need to raise them again in a more, condensed manner, and on the one hand, in a book, and also expand them to the current context. And this is why I decided to, to gather my thoughts from all these types of work and put them in the new context and publish them as a book. So just to give you an example, I submitted the book proposal to Cambridge before the Dobbs ruling. But obviously, the day that the ruling was published, so any doubts that I may have had about the relevancy of the proposal or the importance of discussing these issues, have ended on that day.
Absolutely. So I suppose this is one of these situations in which you're proven right, but that is an unfortunate development in many ways, right? Like you've been saying this all along. We all wished perhaps that you were wrong, and then unfortunately you see it in the past year sort of exploding all over. So let us get into the what I see as the three major themes of the book, and you mentioned some of them in your answer. So you talk about the patriarchy, you talk about the rise of the religious and right-wing movement, and you talk about the liberal state as well. So how about we start with the connection between populism, its attack against liberal democracy, and women's rights? Can you tell us a little bit more about this relationship?
Yes, sure. So this is a very important question. So, but first, populism, as you know, we all know, is a highly contested term. So we need to start with my working definition of what right-wing populism is. And I agree with Arat Cohen's characterization of populism as an ideologically thin political tool that flexibly draws on thick host ideologies and switches and combines them to achieve political power. So right-wing populist leaders draw on a range of right-wing ideologies in order to strengthen their political power. Patriarchal religion and religious nationalism are two very important tools in this populist toolkit. And these ideologies that populists draw from have always existed in liberal democracies. But the success of right-wing populist leaders such as Trump, Orban, Netanyahu stems from their particular populist political technique. So what is that technique? That populist leaders gain the support of different right-wing ideologies and their followers by using two main political tactics. First, it's the creating this us and them opposition between the pure traditional people and the corrupt liberal elite. And into this opposition, they combine all the promises that their different followers want to hear, including the promise that they'll fight against women's rights, against what they call gender ideology, against rights of racial minorities, against immigrants, and so on. Everything can come into this us-them opposition. And the second tactic, which right-wing populists use, is accusing the liberal state structure, which includes, for example, the separation of powers, the courts, the public administration, the free press, human rights, of standing between the populist leader and his ability to fulfill all his promises to his followers. So again, the populist leader tells his followers that they are the true people as opposed to all others, and that they are entitled to have their beliefs directly implemented in the state, no matter how prejudicial these beliefs are against women, against sexual minorities, against racial minorities, immigrants, whatever. So this direct attack of populists on the liberal state structure is I think, the real game changer that populists have inserted into these conflicts that have always existed. Because all these ideologies and prejudices, even though they existed, liberal theory and practice assumed that simply by maintaining a liberal state structure, they'll be able to contain those prejudices, they'll be able to prevent them from taking over the state. And what we see now is that they were very, very wrong.
So that's really interesting that you mentioned how, the liberal state has made this assumption that by maintaining the institutional structure, we could sort of let those prejudices within the private sphere. Because in the book, you precisely criticize liberalism for letting these patriarchal beliefs about women, about gender, flourish in the private sphere, right? Yeah, and you're also very critical of this distinction between the public and the private, like many feminists are, like many feminists say, and like you say in the book, the private itself is political. So can you tell us a little bit about this private public distinction and how it fits into what we've been talking about so far regarding the right wing's attack on women's rights?
Yes, yes, sure. So this directly continues, as you say, my point regarding populism success. In the book, I criticize liberalism in general and specifically Rawls's political liberalism, which has in effect become the blueprint for liberal states and for assuming that the public-private distinction is a good solution to this problem that we have citizens who hold very different ideologies, what Rawls calls the incompatible comprehensive doctrines. We want them all to live together and maintain over time a stable and just society of free and equal citizens. And Rawls assumes, and liberalism assumes also, that this distinction between the public political sphere in which political liberal principles such as equality for women, for example, must be maintained on the one hand, and then the private sphere on the other hand, in which he sees, which Rawls sees as non-political, in which he believes that individual freedom should be maintained in the sense that the state cannot intervene and individuals and groups in the private sphere are allowed to hold illiberal ideologies, including racist ideologies, sexist ideologies, and live according to them. Liberalism gives especially robust protections to religious ideologies, including in their most sexist and racist variations, because it assumes that the separation between religion and the state means that religion, including patriarchal religion, is confined to this private sphere where it allegedly cannot adversely influence the equality guaranteed to women in the public sphere. But my view is that this assumption that the public-private distinction and its alleged relegation of sexist ideologies into the private sphere and that this can protect women's rights, I think this assumption is wrong, and this is what I claim in the book. And again, of course, feminists have always claimed that the personal is political, that it's especially true for women because women's exploitation, their oppression in the private sphere has actually been the basis upon which the liberal capitalist state is predicated. But my claim is wider than that in the book, and it holds that this same public-private distinction has allowed illiberal ideologies to grow, to gain power in that private sphere. And that power is now used not only against women, but it's used by populist leaders to dismantle the liberal state structure itself in what has become known as the dark side of civil society. Now, most feminists, including myself, don't claim that this public-private distinction should be abandoned altogether. But we do claim that its contours need to be rethought, and that currently what the private sphere is used for by illiberal ideologies is both as a shield against government intervention. So patriarchal religions use the private sphere as a shield against government intervention, telling the government, you cannot touch us because we are in the private sphere, and as a sword against women's rights, telling women, you have to do what we tell you to do because this is the private sphere and here you have to listen to us. And now also as a sword against the liberal state structure by telling their followers that this same liberal state structure is what actually impedes their real freedom and real rights. Now, this liberal weakness is exactly what allows right-wing populism to thrive, because it brings all these illiberal ideologies together and as I said, gains their support by promising them to dismantle this structure and to implement their prejudices in the public sphere.
I really like that analogy of the sword and the shield, how, you know, they can use it both as a shield from state intervention, but also as a sword to remake the private sphere, right, into a gender unequal, but also, as you say, use it as a sword to dismantle the liberal state and women's rights in the public sphere as well. So, starting from that, you also talk about very clearly about a threat, right, of a transition from the liberal state to what you say would be a patrimonial state. Can you explain what you mean by this?
Yes, so this continues my last point, because again, Rawls and other liberals believe that the public-private distinction is a good compromise. And that, you know, illiberal ideologies, which Rawls called reasonable comprehensive doctrines, would be willing to accept this restricted place they are allotted in the private sphere of the liberal state, and to accept the fact that in the public sphere, in the state structure, the political liberal ideology is the one that maintains. And that in those structures, they are, again, allegedly, according to Rawls, not allowed to act on their illiberal and discriminatory aspects of their ideologies. Now, even this compromise has always been bad for women, again, because it meant that the liberal state protects and even empowers the discrimination against women, both at home and in many patriarchal religious institutions, such as churches, schools, social service organizations, etc. But this compromise has not been ideal even for the followers of those illiberal ideologies, because it required them, it expected from them to agree not to act on their what is allegedly their deeply held religious discriminatory beliefs against women, against racial minorities, against immigrants, not to act on them in the public sphere. Now, Rawls believed, or maybe he just hoped, because there are places in which he says, well, I hope this is going to, I'm going to assume that this is what's going to happen, that these reasonably liberal comprehensive doctrines and their followers will accept the logic behind this distinction and behind having state institutions treat everybody as free and equal, even if this goes against their own personal beliefs, which call for discriminating against people on the basis of sex or race or whatever. But what populist leaders are doing is that they're targeting precisely this assumption, and they're telling their supporters, you do not need to agree to this division between the public and the private. You do not need to agree to be discriminatory only in the private sphere. You have the right, as the true people, to have your prejudices enacted in the public sphere. And if you give us the power, we'll dismantle all the liberal institutions, state institutions that prevent that. Now, if this is the case, what happens after? Okay, so we've dismantled these institutions. Where are we going to? And this is my claim is that what comes after the liberal state, at least in the minds of some populist leaders, such as Trump, such as Orban, such as Netanyahu, is what was known as, and will be known again as, the patrimonial state. what is, then the question is, what is the patrimonial state? So we've gotten used to thinking about patriarchy only as a domination of male domination over women or sexism, but patriarchy is much more than that. So, for example, anthropologist Sherry Ortner explains it's a social formation of male gendered power that we can find in many, with a certain structure that we can find replicated in many, many institutions, in many arenas of the social life, and also on the state level. So, for example, sociologist Max Weber saw patriarchal domination as the purest form of traditional authority, and as what forms the basis of what he termed as the patrimonial state. So the patrimonial state was actually the first form of rule, and following Weber, there's two academics, Hansen and Kopstein, two sociologists, define patrimonialism as a form of traditional legitimate domination in which the ruler fuses administration with personal authority and considers the state itself to be some sort of family business. Now, so for example, in their, they have a book, Hansen and Kopstein, on which is focused on the US, but not only. It's called The Assault on the State. And what they worry about in that book is that the dismantling of the administrative state, which patrimonial leaders like Trump do, and we can see it all around us, because they treat the state as a family business and not as a modern liberal democracy. And their worry is that a state cannot function as a modern state in this form. And in my analysis, what we're doing is actually we're going back to Filmer's Patriarcha, which is the political theory which preceded liberalism, and in which Filmer justifies the authority of kings to rule over their people as given by God to Adam, to the first man, to rule over his, his sons and his offspring and all living creatures. And this religious, patriarchal religious rule of the father over his sons, over his wife, over everything, which liberalism has relegated into the private sphere, is now coming back because of the, of the populist leaders, also into the private, into the public sphere as a political system of government. So what we're basically seeing is that we have this old new political system of government, which replaces, again, replaces a liberal democracy.
Yeah, so one of the things when I was reading the book that I really liked about it, and there are many, but one in particular was that most of the literature now on populism, right-wing, right, are thinking about the threat to liberal constitutional democracy, but there's very little thinking about what this would look like, and right, nothing on what you are arguing, which is we're actually the positive model here is this patrimonial state that precedes liberalism, that has a gendered nature, and that we should be paying attention to. So let us move on straightforwardly into your discussion about religion, right? Because when you talk about religions in the book, you talk about patriarchal religions as unreasonable comprehensive doctrines, but you also draw some distinctions between a fundamentalist religion and a traditionalist religion. And I was wondering if you could explain to us the importance of this distinction in the context of the book.
Yes. So this is, as you say, an important distinction because it flows from the critique regarding political liberalism, because in political liberalism, Rawls bases his theory on a distinction between fundamentalist religions on the one hand, and reasonable religious doctrines on the others. He assumes, and again, he concedes that he may be too optimistic, and as we see, he was too optimistic, definitely. So he assumes that with the exception of a few fundamentalist strands, which do not recognize, so for him, fundamentalist strands are those that do not recognize the idea of free faith. All other strands of the main historical religions are, for him, reasonable comprehensive doctrines. Now, Okin, for example, Susan Okin observes that this means that Rawls includes in the reasonable religious doctrines that he sees all those doctrines, or many of those doctrines, that preach and practice highly sexist modes of life and discrimination against women. And today, if we look at this empirically, we see that these types of religions are both the most powerful and the ones that are growing the most rapidly even in liberal states. But Rawls assumes that most mainstream religions are reasonable, and most of them are open to compromise, open to change. And this assumption has been criticized by sociologists of religion, such as Christina Stokel. They point to a third type of religions, which can be called traditionalist religions. So what's special about this type is that they appear to be integrated in liberal society. They appear to be open to change, like Rawls expects reasonable doctrines to be. They appear to translate religious arguments to secular ones in order to persuade others. But in truth, all this is a show. Okay, so they're not really open to change. They're only using these appearances. They're using secular arguments to push forward what is essentially a thoroughly illiberal agenda. These are, for example, conservative religious actors such as the Russian Orthodox Church, such as the Catholic Church. In Israel, these are the ultra-Orthodox Jewish religion, the religious Zionists. In the United States, you see evangelicals, you see Christian nationalists. So all these are what we can term as traditionalist religious actors who appear to be reasonable and appear to be open to change, but they are actually not. So they do not really hold what Rawls thinks of as reasonable comprehensive doctrines. They just disguise themselves as holding that. If we take Rawls' own words, he says that unreasonable comprehensive doctrines should be contained like war or disease, so that they do not overturn political justice. Now, the fact that these conservative religious actors are very powerful, they're treated as reasonable, they're allowed to influence public policy, is a big part of the problem of that we are facing today.
So we missed something really important, right? Or the liberal framework missed something really important when just thinking about fundamentalist religions as problematic for the sort of long-term survival of the liberal project. And so after reading your book, I've thought a lot about what it means for a religion to be patriarchal. I grew up in Chile, and when I grew up in Chile, this was mostly a Catholic state. I went to Catholic school as well. And so I've been thinking about how do we think of these religions? What's patriarchal about them? And so I think you have in mind something like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a religion is patriarchal if it does not believe in women's equality, right, or in gender equality, or maybe it has a gender worldview of some sort, whereby women have to fulfill certain roles, have to have certain obligations as opposed to men, and so on. And we also know, of course, and we've been talking about this, that the state itself and society itself is also patriarchal in many ways, right? Because as you were saying, the patriarchy, it's about power, it's about an unjust social structure, it has the capacity to reproduce itself. In many ways, lots of units that are part of a society that is patriarchal also going to be patriarchal. So I guess I went down this pessimist sort of thinking hole where I was thinking, well, what are we going to do? Because the state is a patriarchal institution as well in many ways, and it has to deal with patriarchal religions. How do we think about this? Are you worried about this? Do you think the state might have some advantages to deal with these patriarchal religions? What do we do, I guess, is my question. Simple question,
Yeah.
simple question.
Yeah, no, so of course I agree with you, and I'm as worried about this as you are, maybe even more. I don't think that there are good answers to the problem. I mean, one of the reasons why we are at the point in which we are, and I claim that in the book, is because liberalism is also patriarchal, in its own way. Patriarchy is also embedded in liberalism. Again, this public-private distinction, its purpose was to maintain patriarchy, even though only in the private sphere. Okay, so but this backfired because patriarchy doesn't want to remain in the private sphere. It wants to take hold of the public sphere as well, and the populist leaders are very good at giving those political tools that enable patriarchal religions, nationalistic religions, to use the private sphere as a springboard to influence public policy and simply to dismantle the state. So all this means that we cannot trust liberal states as they are today, and that we must be concerned about, but we're not just concerned about women's rights, we're concerned about the survival of the liberal state itself. So the only perhaps good news is that if liberals understand that this threat is not just to women's equality, but it's a threat to liberal existence itself. And I think this has become very obvious, recently. Then they understand that something needs to change. So you cannot, you have to, it's not enough. It was not enough to relegate patriarchy to the private sphere. The solution must be much more far-reaching than that.
That makes sense. Yes, we have to rethink the structures with which we've lived for a long time. So we are unfortunately running out of time. So I just wanted to ask you as the final thing, whether there's anything else you would like to say about the book that you think we've missed in the conversation that it's important for our listeners to hear about.
So I don't know, maybe, in the book, I try to give some suggestions about what can be done and what should be done. I think that, we have we have had these suggestions all along. I talk in the book, I refer to to CEDAW, to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which has, even with all the criticism that feminists have regarding CEDAW, and which I share and which I, mention in the book, and the criticism about the fact that the international community treats women's equality far less seriously than it does, for example, racial equality. Even, given that, CEDAW is still a convention that suggests or even mandate states to take proactive measures to ensure women's equality and to eliminate traditional patriarchal discriminatory notions, both in cultures and in the private sphere and in the public sphere against women. And I think that this is the way forward. Now, obviously, this is it's something which is hard to think or hard to see happening when everything around us is actually going in the different direction. But I think it's important for us when we try to think, what should we do? Should we compromise with those conservative forces that try to tell us that all we need to do is to compromise them with them, and then everything will be okay? Or should we fight against them? And I think that the lesson, the feminist lesson, has always been, even though it hasn't been listened to, is that we have to fight. So the only way to achieve equality for women, and the only way to achieve, to maintain egalitarian liberalism, is to fight for it, without worrying that when you fight for it, you're not being pluralistic enough, you're not recognizing, the fact that others do not want, egalitarianism, that do not want equality. So I think that's my message. That's also the message of the book, I think.
Well, that's a perfect message, I think, to end with: fight for democracy, fight for gender equality. It really is. Thank you so much, Gila, for having this conversation with me today. To our listeners, I remind you that Gila's book is just out, Women's Rights in Liberal States. I really invite all of you to take a look at it. It's wonderful. Thank you again for having this chat with me.
Thank you very much, Marcela. Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome.